She didn't cry at her brother's funeral. Not because she didn't love him, but because every man in that church was watching her, waiting for her to fall apart so they could call it weakness. Eleanor Whitmore stood straight as iron rail, dry-eyed, jaw set, and when the last hymn faded and the men began talking business over her brother's open grave, she made herself a promise. She would find out what really happened to Thomas, and God help the man who tried to stop her. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel and follow Eleanor's journey all the way to the end. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The summer of 1815 came in hot and mean to Philadelphia. The kind of heat that made men short-tempered and women invisible, which suited Eleanor Whitmore just fine most days. Invisible meant nobody was watching. Invisible meant she could work. But tonight, she was not invisible. Tonight, she stood in the center of the Aldrich ballroom, in a steel blue gown that cost more than most men in this room earned in a month, and every single one of them was laughing at her. "Miss Whitmore!" Gerald Hurst stepped toward her, with a particular smile of a man who enjoyed delivering bad news at parties. He was 43, red-faced, and had made his fortune buying railroad land from widows at a third of its value. "Rumor has it you've submitted a formal petition to the Rail Commission to operate Whitmore Rail in your own name." "It isn't a rumor," Eleanor said. "I submitted it this morning." The laughter spread like fire through dry grass. "My dear girl," Hurst set his glass down slowly, savoring the moment. "Women don't operate railroads." "This one does." "Your father built Whitmore Rail. Your brother ran it. And now—" He spread his hands, an actor performing grief he didn't feel. "With poor Thomas gone, the natural course of things is that the company passes to the board." "My father built Whitmore Rail," Eleanor said, and her voice did not shake. "With money my mother inherited and capital I helped him negotiate at the age of 16. Thomas ran it, and I ran it beside him. Every contract, every route, every—" "Eleanor." Her Aunt Margaret appeared at her elbow, voice low and urgent. "Don't." "Every expansion in the last 4 years," Eleanor continued, louder now, "bears my signature alongside his. The commission will find this when they review the records." Hurst looked at her the way men like him looked at women like her. Not with anger, not yet, but with the patient contempt of someone who knows the outcome is already decided. "Be that as it may," he said, "the board has voted. Until the commission rules, Whitmore Rail's operations will be overseen by whom? By myself and the other senior stakeholders." "You are not a senior stakeholder, Mr. Hurst. You hold 11%. I hold 44. Your brother held 44. Thomas left everything to me." Silence. Not the comfortable kind. Hurst looked at the men behind him. Richard Blackwood, who stood a half step back with an expression of polite boredom that didn't reach his eyes. James Aldrich, whose ballroom this was, and who had not yet spoken a word. And 4 or 5 others whose names Eleanor knew and whose intentions she had measured precisely over the last 3 weeks since her brother's death. "There will need to be an official review of the will," Blackwood said from the back. His voice was soft, reasonable. The voice of a man who had practiced sounding reasonable until it became his most dangerous weapon. "These things take time, Miss Whitmore. Surely you understand." Eleanor looked at him. Richard Blackwood was 41, dark-haired, impeccably dressed, and had been her brother's partner for 6 years. Thomas had trusted him. Thomas had considered him a friend. Thomas was dead at 32, and no one could quite explain why the brake mechanism on Car 7 had failed the way it did. "I understand a great deal, Mr. Blackwood," she said. Something moved behind his eyes, small and quick, gone before anyone else could have caught it. But Eleanor caught it. "You'll have our answer within the week," he said, and turned away, and that was that. The music started again. The laughter resumed, quieter now, more private. Margaret pulled Eleanor toward the edge of the room and spoke very fast and very low. "You cannot win this tonight. These men have lawyers, and they have time, and they have the patience of people who have never had to fight for anything, because the world was built for them. You cannot—" "I know." Eleanor took a glass from a passing tray. She didn't drink from it, just held it. "I'm not trying to win tonight, Aunt Margaret. I'm watching."
Watching what? Who he talks to next.
Blackwood had crossed the room to the far corner where a man stood alone near the tall windows. A man Eleanor did not recognize, which was itself unusual. She knew most of Philadelphia's moneyed class by face, if not by name. She made it her business to know. This man was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in clothes that were well made, but not new. Dark hair that needed cutting, a jaw like it had been carved out of the same Virginia stone her father had used for the company's first depot. He stood with the particular stillness of a man who had been in enough rooms where things went wrong that he'd learned to watch all the exits. He was looking at Blackwood with an expression Eleanor recognized, because she sometimes saw it in her own mirror. Suspicion, with nowhere to put itself yet. "Who is that?" she asked. Margaret followed her gaze. Her expression shifted in a way that told Eleanor the answer was complicated before a word came out. "That," Margaret said carefully, "is Caleb Hawthorne." The name meant something. Eleanor sorted through her memory. Facts, not rumors. She'd trained herself years ago to separate the two. Hawthorne. Virginia family. Old money, mostly gone now. There had been a duel 3 years back, some scandal involving a merchant's son, and a debt dispute that ended with the merchant's son in bed for 2 months, and Caleb Hawthorne on a ship to England with his reputation in pieces. He'd come back 18 months ago, she'd heard. Nobody quite knew why. "Why is he here?" she asked. "James Aldrich owes him a favor, I believe, or owes him money. The distinction with James is often unclear." Margaret touched her arm. "Eleanor, whatever you're thinking—" "I'm not thinking anything." "You have that look." "I don't have a look." "You have the look you had when you were 9 years old and you figured out the foreman was stealing lumber. The look that means you've just connected something and you haven't decided what to do with it yet." Eleanor set her glass down. "I need air." She moved toward the doors to the terrace before Margaret could stop her, stepped out into the thick summer dark, and stood at the railing with her hands wrapped tight around the iron and her mind running very fast and very quiet. Thomas. The brake mechanism. Car 7. Blackwood's expression when she'd said, "I understand a great deal." The letter that had arrived yesterday, the one she hadn't told anyone about, the one in Thomas's handwriting from 6 weeks before his death. "Ellie, if something happens to me, look at the Hargrove contract. Look at all of it. Don't trust—" It had ended there, half a sentence, like he'd been interrupted. "Careful," a voice said behind her. "That railing's been loose since April. Aldrich is too cheap to fix it." Eleanor turned. Caleb Hawthorne stood a few feet away, glass in hand, with the mild expression of a man who had not intended to startle her and was not going to apologize for being there. "How do you know about the railing?" she asked. "Same way I know about most things. I paid attention when other people weren't." He glanced at the room behind him through the glass doors. "You're Miss Whitmore." "I am?" "The railroad woman." "That's one way to describe me." He considered this. "What's the other way?" "The woman who owns 44% of Whitmore Rail and intends to keep it. Something that was almost a smile moved across his face. Not the condescending smile she'd been receiving all night. Something different. Like he found the answer legitimately interesting. "They're not going to make it easy," he said. "I know. Blackwood especially." She looked at him more carefully. "You know Blackwood?" "I know of him." He swirled his glass, looked at nothing for a moment. "We had mutual acquaintances in Virginia 3 years back, before certain things happened." He said certain things the way a man says something he's deliberately not elaborating on. Eleanor had learned long ago that the silence after an incomplete sentence was more valuable than anything she could fill it with. She waited. He surprised her by answering without prompting. "My brother did business with a man Blackwood was connected to. The business went wrong. My brother lost everything. And then he lost..." A pause. Short. Controlled. He didn't survive it. The night felt suddenly very still. "I'm sorry," Eleanor said, and meant it. "Were you close with yours?" "Yes." Neither of them spoke for a moment. "You don't think it was an accident," he said. Not a question. She should have been careful. She should have asked how he could possibly know that. Should have deflected. Should have done exactly what Margaret would have told her to do, which was nothing. Say nothing. Trust no one. "No," she said. "I don't." He nodded slowly, like she'd confirmed something he'd already decided. "Miss Whitmore." He turned to face her fully, and there was nothing in his expression except directness, which was so rare in this city that she almost didn't know how to read it. "I came here tonight because Aldrich owed me money, and I needed to collect it in a room full of witnesses. I did not come here looking for anything else." He paused. "But I've been watching Blackwood for 3 years, and I haven't found a way in. And you, and I, are standing in the middle of it." "You want to use me," she said flatly. "I want to propose something that might benefit us both." "How generous." "It's not generous. It's practical." He said it without any apology in his voice. "I have information you may need. You have access I don't. That's a transaction, not charity. I'm not offering you charity." Eleanor studied him. Loud laughter broke through the glass doors behind them. She could see Hurst holding court at the center of the room, and Blackwood watching, always watching, from the far wall. "What kind of information?" she asked. "The kind that explains why Thomas Whitmore's brake system failed the way it did, when the design he filed 6 months ago would have made that failure technically impossible." The air went out of her lungs. She did not let it show. She had practiced not letting things show since she was 14 years old. But something must have moved in her face. Some small thing. Because Hawthorne's expression shifted slightly. Not triumphant, not satisfied, just careful. "You've seen the design," she said. "A copy of it, yes." "Where did you get it?" "Does it matter right now?" "It matters a great deal." He looked at her for a long moment. Then, "Thomas sent it to me, 2 months before he died, with a letter asking me to hold on to it and not say anything until, and I am quoting directly, until Eleanor asks the right questions." Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the railing, the loose railing, the one that might give way, and she breathed carefully through her nose, and she thought about her brother, who had known her well enough to know exactly what she would do. Ask the right questions, Ellie. "Why you?" she managed. "He didn't know you." "He did, actually. We corresponded. Through a mutual contact in the rail industry. Thomas knew what happened to my brother. The full story, not the version that got printed. He reached out to me 8 months ago." Hawthorne's voice was even, factual, like he was reading from a ledger. We shared information. He was building a case, Miss Whitmore. Quietly. Carefully. The kind of case that doesn't get built overnight, and doesn't get built alone. And then he died. And then he died. She turned away from the room, from Blackwood's careful eyes and Hurst's drunken laugh, and stared out into the dark. Thomas. Her brilliant, careful, infuriating brother, who had never once in his life done anything without thinking it through 6 ways first. Who had sent his evidence to a stranger she'd never heard of and left her a half-finished letter and the company full of enemies. "Trust me, Ellie," he'd said once, years ago, when they were still young enough to believe trust was simple. "I always have a plan." "What is it you actually want from me, Mr. Hawthorne?" she asked. "Right now? A conversation." He moved to stand beside her at the railing, not close enough to be improper, far enough to make it clear he'd thought about it. "Tomorrow, I'd like to show you what Thomas sent me. And in exchange? In exchange, when you find what you're going to find, you let me be there when Blackwood answers for it." She looked at him, the set of his jaw, the steadiness in his voice. She thought, this man has been carrying this for 3 years, the same way I've been carrying Thomas for 3 weeks. The weight looks different on different people, but it makes the same marks. "That's not much of a proposal," she said. "No, I suppose it isn't. Most men who want something from me at least come prepared with flattery. I don't have any." I noticed. "Is that a problem?" She almost laughed. She didn't, but she almost did, which was more than she'd managed since the letter about Thomas had arrived. "Breakfast," she said. 7 o'clock, the Meridian Hotel on Chestnut Street. You bring what Thomas sent you. I'll bring my own records. We see if they match. And if they do, then we'll have a real conversation." He nodded once, finished his glass, turned toward the door, then stopped. "Miss Whitmore." "Yes?" "For what it's worth," he said it quietly, without looking at her. "The things they said about you in there. That you're too clever to be marriageable. That you should have let Thomas handle everything." A pause. "Thomas didn't think so. He talked about you like the whole company was yours, and he was just keeping the seat warm." She couldn't speak for a moment. "Thank you," she said finally. He went inside. Eleanor stayed at the railing another few minutes, not because she needed the air anymore, but because she needed to think. About Thomas's letter. About brake mechanisms. About a man from Virginia with steady hands and a dead brother and 3 years of careful waiting. About the way Blackwood had looked at her tonight. That split second of something cold and quick behind his careful eyes. "I understand a great deal, Mr. Blackwood." She understood more now than she had an hour ago. Inside, the music played on. The laughter continued. The men who had laughed at her raised their glasses and talked about her father's railroad like it already belonged to them. Eleanor Whitmore straightened her spine, smoothed her gloves, and walked back through the doors. She had work to do, and she was just getting started. She didn't sleep, not for lack of trying. Eleanor lay in the dark and listened to the house settle around her, and ran Thomas's letter through her mind for the 100th time. Look at the Hargrove contract. Look at all of it. Don't trust who, Thomas? She was at the Meridian Hotel at 6:45, 15 minutes early, because she had never once in her life been late to anything that mattered. The dining room was half empty at that hour, mostly merchants and a few travelers, eating in the particular focused silence of people who had somewhere to be. She chose a table near the back wall and ordered coffee and waited. Caleb Hawthorne walked in at exactly 7 o'clock. He was carrying a leather satchel, and he moved through the room the way Eleanor had noticed the night before. Scanning, measuring, settling. He spotted her before she could raise a hand, crossed the room without hurrying, and sat down across from her, like they'd been meeting here every morning for years. "You're early," he said. "You're on time." "I'm always on time." He set the satchel on the table between them. "It's one of the few things I have left." She didn't smile at that. Neither did he. They understood each other on that point without needing to negotiate it. "Show me," she said. He opened the satchel and set a folded packet of papers on the table. Eleanor reached for them, and for the next 10 minutes, neither of them spoke. She read the way she always read, fast, thorough, her eyes moving in straight lines down each page, and her mind sorting and filing as it went. Thomas's handwriting. His careful, even letters that sloped slightly to the right when he was tired, and went perfectly straight when he was being precise. These letters were perfectly straight. The top document was a set of correspondence between Thomas and a man named Samuel Greer, an engineer out of Baltimore, who had worked briefly for Whitmore Rail before quietly disappearing from the industry 2 years ago. The letters were technical at first: brake mechanisms, load tolerances, safety margins on steep grades. Then they changed. "I believe the modification was deliberate," Thomas had written. Greer confirmed the design submitted to the commission differs from the one installed. Someone changed the specifications between submission and installation. The question is, who authorized it? Eleanor set that page down and picked up the next one. It was a ledger entry, or a copy of one. A payment, $500, made through a contracting company called Hargrove & Sons, to an unnamed third party, dated 4 months before Thomas's death. Hargrove. "Look at the Hargrove contract." "Where did this come from?" she asked without looking up. "Thomas pulled it from the company accounts. He made a copy before—" Caleb stopped. "Before anything happened to the original. He knew the original would disappear." "He was careful about that, yes." Eleanor set the ledger copy down and looked at Caleb directly. "Samuel Greer. Where is he now?" Something changed in Caleb's face. Small and controlled, but she caught it. "He died," Caleb said. 8 months ago. It was ruled an accident." The coffee cup was warm in her hands. She held on to it. "What kind of accident?" "He fell from a train platform in Baltimore, late at night. No witnesses." The silence between them had weight to it. "Thomas knew?" she asked. "Thomas found out 2 weeks after it happened. That was when he wrote to me." Caleb laced his fingers together on the table. "He said Greer's death changed everything, that he'd been moving slowly, building the case the right way, the legal way, and after Greer, he said he didn't have as much time as he'd thought." "Don't trust." "He was scared," Eleanor said. It wasn't a question. "He was strategic," Caleb said carefully. "There's a difference. Your brother wasn't the kind of man who scared easy. He was the kind of man who calculated odds." A pause. "He calculated wrong about how much time he had. But he was right about almost everything else." Eleanor turned back to the papers. There was one more document at the bottom of the stack, a single page, unsigned, in Thomas's hand. A list of names. 7 of them. She recognized 4 immediately. Blackwood, Hurst, 2 members of the Rail Commission she'd dealt with herself. The other 3 were names she didn't know. "What is this?" she asked. "As best I can figure, it's everyone Thomas believed was involved in the scheme." Caleb reached across and pointed to the 3rd name from the bottom. "This one, Aldrich. That's James Aldrich, the man whose ballroom you were standing in last night." Eleanor looked up from the page. "Aldrich is involved?" Thomas believed so. He thought Aldrich was the money behind Blackwood. Blackwood is the face, the operator. Aldrich is the one who made the initial capital available. Caleb's voice stayed level, factual. Blackwood couldn't have set this up alone. The Hargrove payments, the commission contacts, that takes backing. Eleanor stared at the name. James Aldrich, whose party she had attended since she was 16, whose wife had once told her she was the smartest young woman in Philadelphia, and meant it as a warning. Whose ballroom she had stood in last night, while men laughed at her. "He was at the funeral," she said quietly. "He shook my hand. He said Thomas was one of the finest men he'd ever known." "Yes," Caleb said. "I imagine he did." Something cold moved through her chest and settled there. She gathered the papers carefully and set them back in order. Her hands were steady. She had practiced this, the steadiness, the appearance of it, even when something inside her was shaking itself apart. She had learned young that composure was its own kind of power, maybe the only one they couldn't take from her. "I need originals," she said. "These are copies. A lawyer can challenge copies." "I know. Thomas had originals somewhere. He mentioned a location in one of his earlier letters, but it was coded." Caleb reached into the satchel again and produced a smaller envelope. "This came with everything else. I couldn't read it. I figured—" He set it on the table. "I figured you could." Eleanor picked it up. Thomas's handwriting on the front. Her name. Ellie. For when you ask the right questions. Her throat tightened. She opened it carefully and read it once. Twice. A third time. Then she set it down and stared at the wall for a long moment. "What does it say?" Caleb asked. "It's a reference to a book." She pressed her fingers flat against the table. "We used to do this as children. Hide notes inside books. Specific page numbers. Specific words. We had a system." Her voice was steady. She willed it to be steady. "Thomas hid the originals. The location is in the family library. In a book only I would know to look in." "Then we need to get to your library." "My house is being watched," she said. "Blackwood has a man on the street. I noticed him yesterday." Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then, "How long has he been there?" "Since the day after the funeral." She picked up her coffee. "I didn't say anything because I didn't know yet what they were watching for. Now I think they're waiting to see if Thomas left me anything." "Did you search the library yourself?" "I searched the obvious places. I didn't know about the system until right now." She looked at him. "We need to get in and out without Blackwood's man seeing. That's manageable." "You sound very confident." "I've had practice getting in and out of places without being seen." He said it flatly, like it was a simple fact, and Eleanor decided not to ask for elaboration. She was about to say something else when she noticed it. A man 2 tables over, facing the window, who had been nursing the same cup of coffee since she arrived. He hadn't eaten. He hadn't read. He hadn't spoken to anyone. And his eyes, she now realized, had moved to their table twice in the last 10 minutes. She didn't look directly at him. She kept her gaze on Caleb and said very quietly, "Don't turn around. There's someone watching us." Caleb's expression didn't change. "What does he look like?" 40, maybe. Brown coat. No hat." A pause. "He came in after you." "I know who he is," Caleb said, and now his voice had something new in it. Not alarm. Something quieter and more dangerous. "His name is Peters. He worked for Aldrich 3 years ago. He was in Virginia when my brother—" He stopped. "He travels." "Is he dangerous?" "He's useful to men who want things done quietly." Caleb picked up his coffee, like they were discussing nothing more interesting than the weather. "He's not going to do anything in a public dining room." But he's going to report that we met. Then Blackwood will know by this afternoon. Yes. And he'll move faster. He was always going to move faster, Miss Whitmore. The petition you filed yesterday morning, that was the starting gun. He knew it, and you knew it. The only question was how fast you could get to the evidence before he could bury it. Eleanor set her cup down. Then we don't have the luxury of being careful. No, he said. We don't. She thought fast. The library, Thomas's code, the originals.
If Blackwood knew she'd met with Caleb, and he would know within hours, he'd assume she had information. He might move against the library, against the house, against any place Thomas could have left something. Tonight, she said. We get into the library tonight. I'll need to know the layout. I'll draw you a map. What's the book? She almost smiled. Not quite. Sense and Sensibility. Something moved across his face. Not amusement exactly. More like recognition. Your brother hid railroad evidence in a Jane Austen novel. Thomas had a sense of irony. Her voice caught on his name, just slightly. He said it was the last place any of Blackwood's men would think to look. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then, he sounds like he was worth knowing. He was, she said. He was the best person I ever knew. She stood, gathering her gloves. Tonight, 10 o'clock. Come to the side entrance on Maple Street. Knock 3 times. She tucked her chair in. And Mr. Eichthorn, Caleb, bring those documents, all of them, originals or not. I want them with me. She left without waiting for an answer, and she did not look at the man in the brown coat on her way out, though she felt his eyes follow her to the door. The day moved fast and wrong. By noon, Margaret had sent a message. Hurst had been asking questions about Eleanor around the Merchants' Club. By 2 o'clock, Eleanor's lawyer, an old friend of her father's named Josiah Webb, arrived at the house looking like a man who had received bad news. They've filed a contest on the will, he said before he'd fully sat down. On what grounds? Eleanor asked. Mental capacity. He said it with the careful blankness of a man separating himself from the indecency of the claim. They're arguing Thomas was not in sound mind when he made the changes to his estate that named you as primary beneficiary. Eleanor sat very still. He changed his will 4 months before he died. He was perfectly sound. I know that. You know that. But proving it requires time, she said. Yes. Which they're counting on. Yes. She stood up and walked to the window and looked at the street below. Blackwood's man was still there, leaning against the far wall, watching. Reading a newspaper he clearly wasn't reading. Josiah, she said, if I were married, if I had a husband who could legally co-sign the petition and co-own the shares, would that change the contest? Webb was quiet for a moment. A husband would have legal standing that a single woman does not. The commission would be compelled to respond to a petition signed by a man. And the will contest would become substantially more complicated if there were a legitimate male heir to the Whitmore interest on record. He paused. Eleanor, are you proposing what I think you're proposing? I'm asking a legal question. The legal answer is yes. It would change things significantly. Another pause. But it would need to be real. A legitimate marriage on record, not a, I know. She turned away from the window. Thank you, Josiah. He left, looking worried, which was his most natural expression. She sat down at her desk and spent 3 hours going through every Whitmore rail record she had access to. looking for the Hargrove contract in the originals. It had been removed. Of course it had. The space where the file should have been was there. The tab, the folder, the label in someone's careful handwriting. And inside, nothing. Of course. She worked until dark, and then she changed into darker clothes, the plainest thing she owned, and she waited. Caleb was at the side door at 9:58. He had the satchel. He had, she noticed, also come prepared in some other ways she didn't ask about. He moved with a particular quiet of a man who had thought through the situation and dressed accordingly. "The library is on the second floor," she whispered, "far end of the hall. The book is on the third shelf from the bottom, left side. Blackwood's man? Still at the front. He doesn't watch the side. Does anyone else know we're here? Margaret. She's at the front of the house keeping a light on so it looks occupied." He nodded. They moved through the house in silence, and Eleanor navigated by memory and felt something strange. The unreality of it, moving through the house she'd grown up in like a thief, because men who'd broken bread at her father's table had decided it didn't belong to her. The library was dark and quiet, and smelled of old paper and something Thomas had used to clean the bookshelves. Something faintly lemon-sharp, and it hit her the moment she stepped inside. The smell of him. And for one terrible moment, she couldn't move. Caleb stopped beside her. He didn't speak. He didn't try to hurry her or fill the silence or do any of the things people usually did in moments like this. He simply waited. After a moment, she moved forward to the third shelf. Sense and Sensibility was exactly where it had always been. She pulled it out and opened the cover and found Thomas's handwriting on the inside page. Not the code, just 4 words in the margin that hadn't been there before. "I knew you'd come." She closed her eyes for 1 second. 1. Then she turned to page 44, the page Thomas's letter had indicated through their childhood cipher. And there, pressed flat against the spine, was a folded document. She took it out and unfolded it with hands that were not quite steady. It was the original Hargrove contract. 3 pages, signatures, dates, a payment schedule. And at the bottom of the last page, a handwritten addendum signed by Richard Blackwood, authorizing the substitution of the modified brake specifications for the ones filed with the Commission. Proof. Clean, signed, dated proof. "This is it," she said, and her voice was almost entirely steady. Almost. Caleb leaned over her shoulder to look at it. She was aware of how close he was, and then was immediately aware of being aware of it, which was not a useful thing to be aware of at this particular moment. "We need to get this to someone who can't be bought," he said quietly. "I know someone, a federal inspector. He worked with my father years ago. He's not on Blackwood's list." She refolded the document. "But this alone isn't enough. This proves the payment. It proves the modification. It doesn't prove Thomas's death wasn't an accident." "No," Caleb said. "For that we need Greer's original testimony." "Greer is dead." "Greer's letters aren't." He reached into the satchel and produced another envelope, thicker this time. Thomas made copies of every letter Greer sent him. Greer described exactly what he'd seen, exactly how the modification worked, and exactly who he'd been told to report to. He paused. He named Blackwood 3 times. Eleanor took the envelope and held it and thought about Samuel Greer, who had fallen from a train platform in Baltimore on a night when there were no witnesses, who had known the truth and been made quiet and permanent. Don't trust. She looked at Caleb. He was watching her with that steady, measuring expression she was starting to recognize, the one that meant he was running calculations and letting her run her own. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Ask."
What do you actually want out of this? When it's done, when Blackwood answers for it. She held his gaze. My brother is dead. Your brother is dead. The evidence exists. What do you want? He was quiet for a long moment. I want him to stand in front of a room full of people, Caleb said, and have nowhere to run. I want the people who paid him to watch it. I want the record to show what he did and what it cost. He paused. That's all. I'm not looking for money. I don't want revenge the way some men want it.
I just want... He stopped. The truth on record, she said. Yes. She looked at him for a long time in the dark library that smelled of her brother. Then we have the same goal, she said. We have the same goal. She tucked the envelope and the contract together and held them against her chest. There's one more thing. She said it carefully, feeling her way through each word. My lawyer came today. Blackwood's people have filed a contest on Thomas's will. Mental incapacity. It could tie up my ownership for months, long enough for them to complete whatever deal they're trying to push through with the commission. What stops them? A husband. She watched his face. Legally, a husband with standing who can co-sign the commission petition and be on record as co-owner of the Whitmore interest. The contest becomes much harder to maintain. Caleb was very still. I'm not asking you anything yet, she said quickly. I want to be clear about that.
I'm telling you a legal reality.
But you're thinking about asking.
I'm thinking about a great many things. He looked at her for a long moment. Miss Whitmore, he said slowly, I'm a man with a ruined reputation, no money, and enemies in 3 states.
I know.
You'd be attaching yourself to that.
I'd be attaching myself to a man who has been building a case against Richard Blackwood for 3 years and hasn't broken once.
She lifted her chin slightly.
I've had worse options placed in front of me.
Something moved in his face that she couldn't quite name. Let me think about it, he said.
So will I.
They stood in the dark library, with the evidence of 2 dead men's careful work between them. And outside, Blackwood's man watched the front of the house. And somewhere across the city, Richard Blackwood was calculating his next move. And Eleanor Whitmore was calculating hers.
3 days after the library, Caleb Hawthorne asked Eleanor Whitmore to marry him in the back office of Josiah Webb's law firm, with 2 witnesses present and a commission deadline 48 hours away.
It was not romantic. It was not meant to be. Sign here, Josiah said, setting the documents in front of them both. And here, and initial the bottom of page 3. Eleanor signed. Caleb signed. The witnesses, Josiah's clerk, and Margaret, who had cried twice already that morning and was working on a third, added their names. And just like that, in the time it took to move a pen across paper 4 times, Eleanor Whitmore became Eleanor Hawthorne on every document that mattered. Caleb looked at her when it was done. She looked back. Well, he said.
Well, she agreed.
It was not the most eloquent exchange 2 people had ever had on their wedding day, but it was honest. And at this particular moment in Eleanor's life, honest was worth more than eloquent.
Margaret embraced her too tightly and whispered something about Thomas that made Eleanor press her eyes shut for exactly 3 seconds. Then she straightened, accepted Josiah's handshake, and turned to the work. They filed the updated commission petition before noon. Caleb's name alongside hers, the Whitmore rail ownership formally registered under both. By 2 o'clock, Josiah had sent a response to the will contest. As Mrs. Hawthorne, Eleanor was no longer a single woman attempting to claim an inheritance through a contested will. She was a married woman whose husband had legal standing that could not be as easily dismissed.
Blackwood's lawyer would have it by end of business. "He's going to move tonight," Caleb said when they were back at the house. "Or tomorrow morning at the latest. The petition changes his timeline." "I know." Eleanor was already at the desk, the evidence spread out in front of her in the order she'd organized it. The Hargrove contract, Greer's letters, the ledger copy, the list of names in Thomas's handwriting. "I want to get everything to Inspector Dalton before Blackwood can challenge the filing." "Can Dalton be reached today?" "I sent a messenger this morning. He'll come." She paused. "He was my father's friend. He's one of the men Thomas did not put on that list." "That's the best recommendation I've heard." "It's the only one that matters right now." They worked through the afternoon, organizing, cross-referencing, building the kind of layered case that couldn't be disassembled piece by piece. Caleb was good at this, she was discovering. Not just willing, but genuinely capable. He thought in sequences, in chains of causation, in the way evidence needed to connect to hold under pressure. He'd spent 3 years doing exactly this, she reminded herself. He hadn't been idle. "The weak point," he said, setting a page down, "is Greer's testimony. His letters are damning, but he's dead."
A lawyer can argue the letters are fabricated.
"Unless we can find someone who can corroborate what Greer said." Eleanor tapped the list of names. "The engineer who installed the modified brakes. He'd have to have known. Either he participated knowingly, or he was given false specifications." If he was given false specs, he might not even know what he did. Which means he might still be willing to talk. Caleb looked at her. "You already know who he is." "His name is Daniel Cook. He's been working a freight line out of Harrisburg for the past year. Thomas had his name in one of the earlier letters. He'd located him, but hadn't approached him yet." She pushed the page across to Caleb. "I want to send someone to Harrisburg today." "I'll go myself." "It's a day's ride." "Then I'd better leave soon." Eleanor studied him. There was something she needed to say, and she wasn't sure how to say it, which was unusual for her. She was generally precise with words, but the thing she needed to say was not precise. It was something she'd been carrying since the library, since the wedding that morning, since the moment Margaret had whispered Thomas's name against her cheek. "Caleb," she said, "before you go." He stopped. "What you said the other night, about Thomas, that he talked about me like the company was mine, and he was keeping the seat warm." She looked at the papers rather than at him. "I need you to know that what you're doing, what you've done, the 3 years, the letters, keeping the evidence safe." She stopped, started again. "Thomas trusted you. That means something. That's not a small thing." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "He talked about you like you were the sharpest person he'd ever known," he said. "He also said you were the stubbornest. He said it with tremendous affection both times." Something cracked in her chest, small and sharp. She pressed it back down. "Go to Harrisburg," she said. He went. Inspector Dalton arrived at 4 o'clock, a compact man of 60, with careful eyes and the unhurried manner of someone who had spent 40 years determining what was true. Eleanor had known him since she was a girl. He had bounced her on his knee at her father's Christmas parties and told her she asked too many questions. Now he sat across from her and read through the evidence she'd assembled without interrupting once. When he finished, he sat back. He looked at the window for a long moment. Then he looked at her. "Eleanor," he said, and his voice was different than it had been when he walked in. Heavier. "How long have you had this?" "The copies, 3 days. The original contract, 2 days." "And you've told no one else?" "My lawyer, my husband." She watched his expression at the word husband. He absorbed it without comment, which told her Josiah had already briefed him. No one else. This is enough. He tapped the Hargrove contract. This, and the letters together. This is enough to open a formal investigation. Not a commission review, a federal investigation. He paused. But Eleanor, I want you to understand what that means. Once this is filed, it becomes public record. Blackwood will know within hours. I know. He has resources. He has lawyers, and he has the kind of friends who make problems go away. You will not be safe while this is pending. I'm not safe now, she said plainly. My brother wasn't safe. Samuel Greer wasn't safe. Being careful didn't protect either of them. I'd rather be in motion. Dalton looked at her for a long time. Then he picked up the Hargrove contract and folded it carefully. I'll have a formal request filed by tomorrow morning, he said. I'll need you to remain available. There will be questions, depositions, a formal review of everything Whitmore Rail has on record. He stood. And Eleanor. He paused at the door. Your father would be very angry with me if I let anything happen to you. Then don't, she said. He almost smiled at that. He was gone 20 minutes when Margaret appeared in the doorway with an expression that made Eleanor put down the paper she was holding. What happened? A man came to the front door, Margaret said. He wouldn't give his name. He left this. She held out a folded note. Eleanor opened it. The handwriting was unfamiliar, cramped and slightly shaky, like someone writing in a hurry or in fear. Mrs. Hawthorne, I know what happened to your brother. I was there. I cannot come to you directly. Tonight, 9 o'clock, the South Warehouse on Delaware Avenue. Come alone. Tell no one. If you bring anyone, I will not be there, and you will not find me again. No signature. Eleanor read it twice. Then she set it on the desk and thought about Samuel Greer, who had known the truth and was dead. About the man in the brown coat at the Meridian Hotel, about Blackwood's careful eyes. She thought about Thomas's letter. Don't trust. Who brought this? She asked. A boy, young, maybe 12. He said a man paid him a penny to deliver it and walked away. Classic. Untraceable. The kind of arrangement a man made when he didn't want to be followed back. Or the kind of arrangement a man made when he wanted you to walk into a dark warehouse alone. She needed Caleb. Caleb was halfway to Harrisburg. She needed to decide by tonight. Margaret was watching her. Eleanor, you are not going to a warehouse alone at 9 o'clock. I know. I need you to say that with more conviction. I'm thinking. Stop thinking about going and start thinking about who else you can send. I can't send someone else. If whoever this is sees a stranger... She stopped, thought. I won't go alone, but I can't take anyone they'd recognize. Who wouldn't they recognize? Eleanor looked at her. How fast can you get a message to Josiah's clerk? His name was Henry, and he was 22, and had the particular eagerness of a young man who wanted to be useful and hadn't yet learned that useful people attracted trouble. He arrived at the house at 7:30, and Eleanor told him exactly what she needed, not what it was for, just what to do. Stand here, watch that door. If I signal, go to this address and say this name. He nodded with big, serious eyes and didn't ask questions. She was at Delaware Avenue at 8:55. The warehouse smelled of river water and old wood and the specific warm rot of a Philadelphia summer. She moved through it carefully, staying close to the wall, listening. Mrs. Hawthorne. The voice came from the far end, half hidden behind a stack of freight crates. A man stepped into the narrow strip of moonlight from the high windows, mid-40s, heavy-set, with the calloused hands of someone who worked with them for a living. He was sweating, and he kept looking toward the door. Who are you? Eleanor asked. My name is William Foster. I worked for Whitmore Rail for 6 years, in the maintenance division. He swallowed. I was the foreman on car 7. The air in the room changed. You installed the brakes, Eleanor said. I installed what I was told to install. I had specifications. I thought they were the right ones. They came from the engineering office. They had the right signatures, the right stamps. I had no reason to... He stopped, pressed his hand against his mouth. I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know until after. After what? After Mr. Whitmore died, and someone started asking questions about car 7, and then Greer... His voice cracked. When Greer died, I knew. I knew what I'd done, what they'd used me to do. Who gave you the modified specifications? A man from the engineering office. His name was Briggs. But Briggs didn't originate them. He told me later, not directly, but I understood, that they'd come from above, from someone with authority to authorize changes. Blackwood, Eleanor said. Foster's jaw tightened. I can't prove it. I never saw his signature on anything. But Briggs told me one night, after he'd had too much to drink, that a very important man had authorized a substitution, and that the less anyone asked about it, the longer everyone would stay healthy. He looked at her with something desperate in his face. Mrs. Hawthorne, I have a wife. I have children. I have been living with this for over a year, and I cannot... He stopped. I cannot keep living with it. I need someone to know. Will you testify? Eleanor asked. Formally, under oath, to a federal inspector. He was quiet for a long moment. The warehouse creaked around them. If I testify, he said, Blackwood will come after my family. Inspector Dalton can arrange protection. Federal protection. Blackwood's reach doesn't extend to a sitting federal inquiry. You sound very certain of that. I am not certain of anything right now, Eleanor said, and something in the honesty of it seemed to reach him, because his shoulders dropped slightly. But I know that if you don't testify, the only people who pay for what happened are my brother and Samuel Greer and every other person who got in the way. And Blackwood walks free to do it again. She paused. I'm not asking you to be brave. I'm asking you to choose what you can live with. Foster stared at the floor. He was still staring at it when the warehouse door opened. Not the door Eleanor had come through, the side door, 30 feet to her left. 2 men walked in. Eleanor didn't know the one in front, but she knew the one behind him, the one with the careful posture and the soft, reasonable voice. Richard Blackwood. Miss Whitmore, he said, and then corrected himself with a small smile. Mrs. Hawthorne, I should say. My congratulations on the sudden marriage. Hawthorne is an interesting choice. Eleanor did not move. Every nerve in her body was screaming, and she stood perfectly still. Mr. Blackwood, she said, you've been busy. He walked toward her unhurriedly, hands clasped behind his back, the posture of a man taking a Sunday stroll. Filing petitions, meeting with federal inspectors, digging through your brother's things. He glanced at Foster, who had gone the color of old flour. And now talking to people who really should know better than to talk. How did you find us? Eleanor asked. The boy you paid to watch the door. He said it almost gently. He's 12. He'll take money from anyone. A pause. You're very good at this, Mrs. Hawthorne. I want you to know I mean that. Your brother was good too. He was smarter than most of the men I've worked with. Something crossed his face. That made things more complicated than I would have liked. The admission hit her like cold water. He hadn't confessed to anything specific. He never would. She understood that now. He was too careful. But the acknowledgement of Thomas's intelligence, the casual way he'd said that made things more complicated, it was enough. He knew she understood.
And he didn't care, because he had two men and she had no one. Or so he thought. "You filed with Dalton today," Blackwood continued. "I know what you filed. My lawyer will challenge every piece of it. Copies, unsigned letters, hearsay from a dead engineer." He stopped 10 feet from her. "I want to offer you something, Mrs. Hawthorne. A settlement. Whitmore Rail comes under full board control. You receive a fair financial compensation. Very fair. I'll be generous. You and your new husband take the money and go somewhere quiet, and all of this," he gestured vaguely, "stops." "And Thomas?" Eleanor said. "Thomas was an accident. Thomas was murdered." The word landed in the room like a stone dropped in still water. Blackwood's expression didn't change. "That's a very serious accusation with no evidence to support it. I have the original Hargrove contract with your signature on it." She watched his face. Something moved there. So small, so controlled. But it moved. "I have it, Mr. Blackwood. Not a copy. The original. And Inspector Dalton has already seen it." The silence was absolute. The man behind Blackwood shifted his weight. The other one, near the side door, was very still. "I don't believe you," Blackwood said. "You do," Eleanor said. "You're calculating right now what it means. Whether Dalton copied it before I gave it to him, or whether the only copy is the one I have." She held his gaze. "You're wondering if taking it from me tonight is worth the risk. You're wondering if I've already sent duplicates somewhere you can't reach." She had. She'd given a sealed copy to Josiah that morning, with instructions to open it if she hadn't checked in by midnight. But Blackwood didn't know that. And the uncertainty, the razor-thin margin of it, was the only thing she had. "I'm not going to take your settlement," she said. "I'm not going to go somewhere quiet. I'm going to stand in front of every man in this city who laughed at me, and I'm going to put what you did on the public record. And I'm going to watch you answer for Thomas." Her voice was entirely steady. She made sure of it. "And if you have any sense at all, you'll understand that making me disappear tonight creates more problems than it solves. Dalton already has the filing. My lawyer has the copy. My husband knows everything." She took one step forward. "You needed Thomas quiet before he could build the case. The case is built. I'm not Thomas. I'm not alone. And I'm not going to stop." Blackwood looked at her. He looked at her for a very long time. And in his face, behind all the careful reasonableness, behind the practiced control, she saw it. Not defeat. Not yet. Something more dangerous. A man recalculating. A man who had just understood that the problem was larger than he'd thought. He stepped back. A small, deliberate motion. He glanced at the man beside him, a look that communicated something Eleanor couldn't read, and then he looked at her one more time. "You're very much like your brother," he said. "I know," she said. "That's what makes me dangerous." He left through the side door. His men followed. Eleanor stood in the empty warehouse and breathed for the first time in what felt like 10 minutes, and her legs were shaking under her skirt, where no one could see them, and she let them shake, because there was no one watching. Foster made a sound that was almost a sob. "She meant it," he said, to no one in particular. "She actually meant it." "Mr. Foster," Eleanor turned to him. Her voice was steadier than she felt. "I need you to come with me right now, tonight, to Inspector Dalton's home. You're going to tell him everything you told me, and then you're going to tell it again, under oath." She paused. "And I need you to do it before Blackwood decides I was bluffing." "Were you?" Foster asked.
Bluffing? Eleanor picked up her coat from where she'd set it on the crate. About the copy with Josiah? No. She moved toward the door. About being afraid? Not even slightly. Foster followed her out into the summer night. Henry was exactly where she'd left him, young and wide-eyed and entirely unaware of what had happened inside. She told him to go home and pressed a coin into his hand and thanked him, and he left looking like a boy who would be telling this story for years. She walked to Josiah's house with Foster beside her, and the evidence in her bag, and Blackwood's face in her mind. That recalculating look, that moment of reassessment. She had bought herself time. Maybe a day, maybe less. Caleb would be back from Harrisburg by morning. She needed him back. Not because she couldn't do this alone. She could. She had been doing it. But because somewhere between the library and the wedding, and the long afternoon of building a case side by side, the arithmetic of a loan had started to feel different. She didn't examine that too closely. She had too much work to do. Dalton opened his door at 9:30 to find Eleanor Whitmore, Eleanor Hawthorne, on his porch, with a Whitmore rail maintenance foreman and the expression of a woman who had just looked Richard Blackwood in the eye and not flinched. He stepped back without a word and let them both in. And the case that Thomas Whitmore had started building 8 months ago, the case that had cost him everything, began to close. Caleb came back from Harrisburg at 6 a.m, with Daniel Cook sitting beside him in the carriage, and the particular expression of a man who had not slept and did not regret it. Eleanor met them at the door. She looked at Cook, 50, weathered, with the careful stillness of a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and was deciding whether to set it down. And then she looked at Caleb. "He'll testify," Caleb said. "So will Foster," she said. "Dalton has him. He gave his full statement last night." Something moved through Caleb's face. Relief, she thought, though on him it was a quiet thing. "Then we have 2 witnesses," he said. "We have 2 witnesses. The original contract, Greer's letters, and the ledger copy." She stepped back to let them in. "And Blackwood knows it. He was at the warehouse last night." Caleb went very still. "What warehouse?" She told him. All of it. The note, Foster, the confrontation, what Blackwood had said, and what she had said back. She told it cleanly, without drama, the way she always told difficult things, and she watched his face move through a sequence of emotions he was trying not to show. Anger first, then something colder, then something she couldn't name that settled in around his jaw and stayed there. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You went alone," he said. "I had Henry watching the door." Henry is 22 years old and weighs 150 pounds. "He was sufficient for what I needed him to do." "Eleanor." His voice was low, not angry, or not only angry. There was something else underneath it. Blackwood had 2 men in that warehouse. He has already made 2 people disappear. And you walked in there with a clerk watching the outside door. "I know the risk I took." "Do you?" "Yes." She met his eyes directly. "I calculated it the same way Thomas would have. The same way you have been calculating things for 3 years. I'm not reckless, Caleb. I'm in motion. There's a difference." He looked at her for a long time. Then he exhaled. Not defeated, not satisfied. Just a man releasing something he'd been holding. "Don't do it again without telling me first," he said. "If you're available, I'll tell you," she said. "If you're in Harrisburg, I'll make do." It wasn't quite an argument. It wasn't quite an agreement. It was something in between that both of them left alone because there was too much else to do. Cook gave his statement to Dalton by 9 o'clock that morning, Dalton listened with the focused silence of a man building an architecture in his mind, asking only the questions he needed and none he didn't. When Cook finished, Dalton sat back and looked at the ceiling for 30 seconds. And then he looked at Eleanor. "I'm filing for a formal federal investigation today," he said. "This goes above the commission. This goes above Philadelphia. This is fraud, conspiracy, and I believe we can make a case for criminal negligence in Thomas's death. Possibly more." He paused. "But Eleanor, once I file this, it's public within 24 hours. Every newspaper in this city will have it."
"Good," Eleanor said. "That's not what most people say."
"Most people have more to lose than I do." Dalton looked at Caleb, who had been standing near the door through the whole conversation. "And you, Mr. Hawthorne? This becomes your business too, given the marriage?" "It's been my business for 3 years," Caleb said. "I'd like it finished." Dalton filed before noon. The newspapers had it by the following morning. Eleanor read the headline from the Philadelphia Gazette at her desk with her second cup of coffee. "Federal investigation opened into Whitmore rail fraud. Commission member named," and felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Not relief exactly, something harder and cleaner than relief. The particular feeling of a thing set in motion that cannot be stopped. Then she turned the page and found the second article. It was smaller, tucked below the fold, with a particular placement of something someone had paid to have placed there. The headline read, "Questions surround new Whitmore husband. Virginia scandal revisited." She read it in full. It was precise and vicious in the way only paid journalism could be. Technically accurate in the surface details, entirely false in its implications. The duel 3 years ago. The departure from Virginia. Debts unspecified but implied to be massive. Associates unnamed but implied to be dangerous. And at the bottom, a single sentence that sat in her stomach like a stone. Sources close to the Whitmore estate question whether the marriage was arranged to obscure the true financial state of the company. Blackwood. He couldn't stop the investigation now, but he could shift the story. He could turn the public conversation from his crimes to Caleb's past, from the evidence to the marriage, from Thomas to a Virginia duel that had nothing to do with any of it. Eleanor set the paper down. Caleb was in the hallway when she came out of the study. He had the Gazette in his hand, open to the second article. He held it up when he saw her face. "I know," she said. "This is Blackwood's move." "Yes. He's trying to make the investigation about me instead of him. If he can discredit me publicly, he discredits you as a witness and he muddies the marriage, and he creates enough noise that the commission can stall the investigation for months while lawyers argue." She said it all at once, the whole sequence of it, because she'd already mapped it. It won't work. Dalton's filing is already on record. The witnesses are already protected. He can't unfile what's been filed. But he can make the next 6 months very ugly. Caleb's voice was even. "Eleanor, what's in that article? People will talk. The duel, the debts, my family name." He paused. "I'm not ashamed of what happened, but I need you to know that standing beside me publicly is going to cost you something. It already is." "Standing beside you hasn't cost me anything I wasn't already paying," she said. "They were already laughing at me. They were already contesting the will. They already decided I wasn't worth taking seriously." She crossed the hallway and took the paper from his hand and put it on the side table. "Let them write whatever they want. We're past the point where it changes anything." He looked at her carefully. "You sure about that?" "No," she said honestly, "but I'm sure I'm not going to back down because of a newspaper article." He almost smiled. The real kind, the one that reached his eyes. The investigation moved fast once Dalton had momentum. A federal marshal was assigned. Blackwood's business offices were served with a records request. The commission members named on Thomas's list received formal notices. Hearst, according to Margaret, had been seen leaving his club the day after the filing, with the expression of a man who had realized too late that the current was stronger than he'd thought. Aldrich said nothing publicly. His silence had a texture to it, Eleanor thought. The quality of a man consulting lawyers and waiting to see which way the wind broke. On the fourth day after the filing, a man came to see Caleb. He was waiting on the front step when Caleb returned from Josiah's office. A well-dressed man of about 50, with silver in his hair, and the posture of old Virginia money. Caleb stopped when he saw him. His face did something complicated. "Whitfield," he said. "Caleb," the man stood. "It's been a while. 3 years. Your mother sends her regards." "My mother doesn't know I'm here," Caleb said. "What do you want, Harrison?" Eleanor was in the doorway. She watched Whitfield glance at her and calculate something behind his careful expression. "I came to offer you a way out," Whitfield said. "The men you're targeting, Blackwood, Aldrich, they have friends, Caleb. Friends who reach further than you know. The investigation will be challenged. There are people with enough influence to bury this at the federal level if they choose to." He paused. "I'm offering you safe passage, back to Virginia. The debts cleared, all of them. A clean start. You take your wife and you go home, and this is done." "Done for who?" Caleb said. "Done for everyone. Not for Thomas Whitmore." Whitfield's expression didn't change. "Thomas Whitmore is dead. And whoever helped put him there is still walking free." Caleb's voice was level. Entirely level. The particular calm of a man who has thought about this moment and knows exactly where he stands. "Who sent you, Harrison? Was it Blackwood directly, or was it Aldrich?" "I came on my own." "No, you didn't. You never do anything on your own." Caleb took a step toward him. 3 years ago, you told me the duel was my fault, that I should have let Marsh take the money and called it done, that some men were too powerful to fight." He paused. "You were wrong then. You're wrong now." Whitfield looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Eleanor. "Mrs. Hawthorne," he said, "you seem like a sensible woman." "I'm a practical one," Eleanor said. "And practically speaking, you should know that everything you've just said in front of me is going directly to Inspector Dalton, including your name, including the offer." She tilted her head slightly. "So if you came here hoping for a quiet conversation, I'm afraid you've miscalculated." Whitfield's composure slipped, just for a second. Then he picked up his hat from where he'd left it on the step, settled it on his head, and walked away without another word. Eleanor looked at Caleb. "Who is he?" "Someone Blackwood uses when he wants to look reasonable." Caleb watched him go. "He offered the same thing to my brother 2 weeks before Daniel died. A clean start, safe passage." His jaw was tight. "My brother took it. He went somewhere quiet, and 6 months later he was dead anyway." Eleanor said nothing for a moment. "Caleb," she said. He looked at her. "They're scared," she said. "Men like Whitfield don't show up to offer clean starts when they're confident. They only bargain when they're losing." She paused. "We're winning." He absorbed that. Something in his face shifted. Not relief, not hope exactly. Something more like a man allowing himself to believe a thing he'd been afraid to believe. "We should tell Dalton about Whitfield," he said. "I already sent Henry," she said. He looked at her. "When?" "While you were talking." She let the corner of her mouth move. "I'm always 2 steps ahead. You should be used to it by now." He looked at her for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. "I'm starting to understand that," he said. Dalton's message arrived 2 hours later. Blackwood had been formally summoned to appear before the federal inquiry. The date was set for 11 days out. Every record from Whitmore Rail, Hargrove & Sons, and the Associated Commission accounts had been frozen pending review. It was not over. But the shape of it was clear now. Except that evening, Margaret came in from the street with her face arranged into the particular careful blankness she used when she had bad news she was deciding how to deliver. "Tell me," Eleanor said. "There's a new article. The Pennsylvania Register this time." Margaret set the paper on the desk. "It's not about the duel." Eleanor looked at it. The headline said, "Whitmore Widow or Whitmore Heir. Questions of mental state cloud inheritance claim." The article was longer than the first, more detailed. It cited unnamed witnesses who claimed to have observed Eleanor behaving erratically in the weeks following Thomas's death. It referenced, delicately, her insistence on running the company against the board's wishes, her unwillingness to accept what it called reasonable oversight, her unconventional decision to marry a disgraced Virginian on extremely short notice. It ended with a quote from a doctor Eleanor had never met, who expressed, in the neutral language of medicine, certain concerns about a woman under extreme grief who might not be in full possession of her faculties. Eleanor read it once, put it down, picked it up, and read it again. "He's trying to have her declared incompetent," Caleb said from the doorway. He'd come in while she was reading. She hadn't heard him. "If he can establish legal incompetency, the marriage can be challenged. The investigation testimony can be questioned, and everything we've built falls apart." "That's not how the law works," Eleanor said. "You can't just declare someone incompetent by printing it in a newspaper." "No, but you can create enough public doubt that a judge who owes you a favor is willing to sign an order for an evaluation." He crossed to the desk. His voice was controlled. Too controlled. The way it got when he was furious and was choosing not to be. This is his last move. If you can't beat the evidence, he buries the witness. "I'm not a witness. I'm the complainant." Even better. Discredit the woman who brought the case, and the case loses its public face. He put his hands flat on the desk. "Eleanor, he's going to push for this fast, before the inquiry date. If he can get a judge to order an evaluation, he can petition to delay the inquiry pending its outcome." "Who's the judge?" she said immediately. "That's the question." She was already moving. "Josiah will know which judges are in Aldrich's pocket. We need to know before Blackwood files anything." She reached for her coat. "And I need to be seen, publicly, today." Functioning, clear-headed, in command of Whitmore Rail business. "If he's going to call my faculties into question, I want 40 witnesses who saw me operating perfectly well this afternoon." "The board meeting," Caleb said. She stopped. "What board meeting?" "Hearst sent notice this morning. Emergency board session. 4 o'clock today." He picked up the notice from the corner of the desk and held it out. "I didn't want to show it to you until..." "Until what? Until you decided I was ready?" She took it from him. Her voice had an edge to it. "I need to know everything, Caleb. Everything. Not what you think I can handle. Everything." He took the rebuke without flinching. "You're right. I'm sorry." The apology was clean. No hedging, no justification. She absorbed it and moved on. 4 o'clock, she said. "Good. This is exactly what I needed." The boardroom of Whitmore Rail was on the second floor of the company's main building on Market Street. A room Eleanor had sat in hundreds of times beside Thomas, behind her father,
watching men make decisions about a company built with her family's blood and capital. She had never once sat at the head of the table. She sat there now. Caleb took the chair to her right. Margaret, who had no official standing but whose presence Eleanor wanted, sat against the wall near the door. Josiah was beside Caleb, with the Hawthorne Whitmore ownership documents in front of him. Hurst arrived first. Then 3 other board members Eleanor knew well enough to read. Then, last, Richard Blackwood. He looked at her at the head of the table, and something moved in his face. Something fast and carefully managed. He sat down without a word. "Thank you all for coming," Eleanor said. Her voice was clear and completely steady. "I'll be brief. The federal inquiry into Whitmore Rail is proceeding. The evidence is on record. I'm aware that some of you have questions about the current ownership and the stability of the company's leadership. I'm here to answer them directly." She looked around the table. "This company was built by my father, with my mother's inheritance and my labor. My brother ran it and died because he tried to protect it. I am now running it, and I intend to run it until there is no longer a company to run, or no longer a me to run it, whichever comes last." A pause. "If anyone at this table has questions about my fitness to do so, I invite you to ask them. Here. Now. On record." Silence. Hurst shifted in his seat. The man to his left looked at the table. Blackwood said nothing. "No questions?" Eleanor said. "Then let's talk about the quarterly reports." She ran the meeting for 90 minutes. She knew every number, every contract, every pending route approval. She asked precise questions and gave precise answers, and watched the men around the table recalculate in real time. Watched them move, one by one, from the version of Eleanor Whitmore they'd constructed in their minds to the one sitting in front of them. Halfway through, she noticed something. 2 of the board members, Aldridge and Park, men who had been firmly in Blackwood's orbit since Thomas died, were not looking at Blackwood for cues anymore. They were looking at her. She filed that away and kept going. When the meeting ended and the room emptied, Blackwood was the last to leave. He paused at the door. "You ran that well," he said. Quiet, almost private. "I know," Eleanor said. "It won't be enough." "We'll see." He left. Caleb waited until his footsteps faded down the stairs, then turned to her. "Aldridge and Park," he said. "I saw it. They're breaking from him. They're deciding which side of this has a future." She began gathering her papers. "Men like that don't have loyalties. They have interests. Our job is to make sure their interests align with ours before the inquiry." "Can they be convinced?" "They already are. They just don't know it yet." She looked at Caleb. "I need to meet with them separately, before the end of the week, quietly." "I'll arrange it." "Caleb," she stopped gathering, looked at him directly. "What Whitfield offered you today? The clean start, the debts, Virginia?" She said it carefully. "Part of you wanted it. I'm not saying that as an accusation." He was quiet. "Part of me is tired," he said finally. 3 years is a long time to carry something. Some mornings I wake up and I don't—" He stopped, started again. "Some mornings I can't remember what it felt like to not be doing this." "I know," she said, and she did. She'd had those mornings herself, in the 5 weeks since Thomas. "But I didn't take it," he said. "I want you to know that I didn't even consider it. Not seriously." He met her eyes. "I'm here to the end of this, whatever that looks like." She looked at him for a moment. There was something she wanted to say, and she was working out how to say it. Not the legal language, not the strategic language, but the true thing underneath.
"I didn't marry you because I needed a signature," she said. "I want you to know that. The legal reason was real, but it wasn't the only reason." He was very still. "What was the other reason?" he asked. She thought about Thomas's letter, the evidence in the library, the warehouse and Blackwood's careful face, the boardroom this afternoon and the particular feeling of not being alone in it. "You're the only person since Thomas," she said, "who talks to me like the answer matters. Not like the question is surprising. Not like I should want someone else to answer it." She paused. "I am aware that is not a particularly romantic declaration." "It's the most honest thing anyone has said to me in 3 years," he said. She picked up her papers. "The inquiry is in 11 days, she said. "We have work to do." "We do," he agreed. And neither of them moved for just a moment longer, standing in the empty boardroom of a company built on grief and stubbornness and the particular refusal to let powerful men win, before Eleanor Whitmore turned for the door and Caleb Hawthorne followed her out. Outside, the city went about its business, loud and indifferent, and entirely unaware that in 11 days, in a federal hearing room on 4th Street, the truth Thomas Whitmore had died to protect was finally going to be told. The 11 days moved the way important days always do, too fast in the moments that mattered, and too slow in the ones that didn't. Eleanor met with Aldridge on a Tuesday and Park on a Wednesday, separately, quietly, in Josiah's office, with the door closed and the evidence laid out on the table between them. She didn't threaten. She didn't beg. She showed them what she had and told them what it meant, and let them do the arithmetic themselves. Both men left looking like people who had narrowly avoided stepping off a ledge they hadn't seen until someone pointed at it. Aldridge sent a formal letter to Dalton's office the following morning, indicating his willingness to cooperate with the federal inquiry. Park sent one that afternoon. Blackwood's lawyer filed a challenge on Thursday. Josiah demolished it in 2 days. Whatever judge Blackwood had been planning to use apparently decided the view from that particular ledge wasn't worth it either. Hearst went quiet. The particular quiet of a man who had consulted enough lawyers to know the difference between a problem you could manage and a problem that had already managed you. And on the morning of the inquiry, Eleanor Whitmore, Eleanor Hawthorne, put on the best dress she owned, which was dark green and cost more than she'd paid for anything except railroad equipment. And she walked into the federal hearing room on 4th Street, with Caleb beside her and Josiah behind her, and her brother's evidence in her hands. The room was full. She had not expected that, or she had expected it in theory, but not in practice. The physical weight of that many people in one room, all looking at her as she walked to the front table and sat down. Reporters, commission members, half of Philadelphia's merchant class, it seemed, all of them wearing the expressions of people who had come to watch something happen and weren't entirely sure what. Blackwood was at the table across the aisle. His lawyer sat to his left. His face was composed, and his posture was immaculate, and he did not look at her when she came in. She looked at him. She wanted him to know she was looking. He knew. The inquiry opened formally at 9 o'clock. The federal examiner, a dry-voiced man named Hayward, who had clearly heard too many lies in his career to be impressed by any particular set of them, laid out the process without ceremony. Evidence first, then witnesses, then questions. He said the words criminal conspiracy and fraudulent modification and negligent homicide in the same flat tone he might have used to read a grocery list. And Eleanor watched Blackwood's lawyer put a hand on Blackwood's arm under the table. The Hargrove contract went into evidence at 9:22. Greer's letters went in at 9:35. Foster took the witness position at 10 o'clock and spoke for 40 minutes in the voice of a man who had been rehearsing this moment in his conscience for over a year. He was precise. He was credible. He did not embellish, and he did not minimize. And when Blackwood's lawyer cross-examined him and tried to suggest the specifications he'd installed had been standard for that era, Foster looked at him with the quiet authority of a man who had spent 20 years working with brake systems and said, "Sir, I know the difference between a working brake and one designed to fail. I installed what I was given. What I was given was designed to fail." The room was very still after that. Cook testified next. Same precision, same weight. He had come from Harrisburg with the look of a man who had made a decision he intended to keep, and he kept it. 3 decades of railroad engineering delivered in plain language that left no room for interpretation. At 1:15, after a brief recess, Examiner Hayward called Eleanor to the witness position. She had given testimony before. Commission hearings, contract disputes, the ordinary machinery of business that men pretended women didn't understand. She knew how to do this. She sat straight, and she kept her voice level, and she answered every question with the precision of someone who had organized the evidence herself, and therefore knew every piece of it in the order it mattered. Hayward was thorough. He took her from the beginning. Thomas's first contact with Greer, the letters, the Hargrove payment, the night in the library, the warehouse confrontation. And he let her build it the way she'd built it in her own mind, piece by piece, until the whole shape of it was visible in the room. When he finished, he looked at his papers for a moment, and then looked at her. "Mrs. Hawthorne," he said, "in your assessment, was your brother's death an accident?" Blackwood's lawyer was on his feet immediately. "Objection. Calls for speculation." "This is a federal inquiry, Counselor, not a courtroom," Hayward said without looking up. "Sit down." He looked back at Eleanor. "You may answer." Eleanor looked at Hayward. She did not look at Blackwood, though she was aware of him at the edge of her vision, very still, very controlled. "No," she said. "It was not an accident. My brother discovered a fraud that powerful men had committed and documented the evidence of it, and he died before he could bring it forward. Whether his death was directly ordered or simply arranged through criminal negligence, the men who modified those brakes knew what would happen when Car 7 went down the Kenner grade. They knew." She paused. "Thomas knew they knew. That's why he sent his evidence away before they could take it from him. That's why you have it today." The room did not make a sound. Hayward wrote something, looked up. "Thank you, Mrs. Hawthorne. That will be all." She walked back to her table and sat down, and her hands were shaking under the table where no one could see them. Caleb, beside her, put his hand over hers once, just briefly, and then moved it away. It was enough. Blackwood took the witness position at 2 o'clock. His lawyer had spent the recess in what Eleanor could tell, from the body language 20 feet away, was an increasingly tense conversation. Blackwood had emerged from it with the same composed face he always wore, but something underneath it was different. Something had shifted. He answered the first 10 minutes of questions the way he answered everything, smoothly, reasonably, with the careful vagueness of a man who had practiced saying nothing while appearing to say something. He didn't recognize the payments. He couldn't account for the modifications. He had full confidence in his engineering staff. He expressed, with perfect sincerity, deep personal sorrow over Thomas's death. Eleanor watched the room, watching him. She watched the reporters' pens moving. She watched Aldridge, sitting 3 rows back, staring at the floor. Then Hayward set down his papers and looked at Blackwood directly. "Mr. Blackwood," he said, "I'd like to draw your attention to page 7 of the Hargrove contract. The addendum. The handwritten addendum." He paused. Is that your signature?" A silence. Blackwood's lawyer moved. Blackwood stilled him with one hand. "It may be," Blackwood said. "It may be," Hayward repeated. "The document is signed R. Blackwood, and it authorizes a substitution of specifications in your handwriting. You're suggesting there may be uncertainty about whether you wrote and signed a document in your own name?" Another silence. Longer. "I sign a great many documents," Blackwood said. "You do," Hayward agreed pleasantly. "And this particular one authorized the installation of a modified brake system on Car 7 of the Whitmore Rail Eastern Freight Line. The brake system that failed 11 months later on the Kenner grade at a speed that killed the driver and caused the derailment in which Thomas Whitmore was fatally injured." Hayward's voice stayed level throughout all of this, matter of fact, like he was reading a schedule. "So let me ask you again. Is that your signature?" Blackwood looked at his lawyer. His lawyer looked at the table. The room held its breath. "I'd like to confer with counsel," Blackwood said. "You can confer with counsel after you answer the question." The silence stretched. Eleanor stopped breathing. "Yes," Blackwood said finally. "That is my signature." The room broke apart. Not loudly. There were no shouts, no drama from the gallery. Just a collective exhale and the sudden rush of pens on paper as every reporter in the room wrote the same thing at the same moment. Eleanor heard it like rain starting. Blackwood's lawyer was on his feet. Words were being exchanged. Hayward was speaking with the calm authority of a man who had not yet begun and was not going to be rushed. And Eleanor sat at her table and looked straight ahead and breathed. Caleb leaned close. "That's it," he said quietly. "That's the whole thing." "It's not over yet," she said. "No, but it's done." There was a difference, she was learning, between a thing being over and a thing being done. Done meant the essential outcome was fixed, even if the rest of the process still had to run its course. Done meant Blackwood had put his own name on it in front of a federal examiner and 60 witnesses, and there was nowhere left to run. The inquiry recessed at 4 o'clock. Hayward's summary would come in the morning. Blackwood and his lawyer left through the side door, quickly, without speaking to anyone. Hurst left just behind them, and Eleanor noticed he didn't look at Blackwood once as he went. The moment the room began emptying, Margaret was there, her arms around Eleanor before Eleanor had fully stood, saying nothing, just holding on. Eleanor let herself be held for exactly as long as she needed, and then straightened. Josiah was shaking Caleb's hand with both of his and saying something about the addendum that Eleanor didn't fully catch. Dalton appeared from the side of the room and stopped in front of her. "Your father," Dalton said, "would have been the proudest man in this building today." Eleanor's throat closed. "Thomas would have been insufferable about it," she managed. "He would have said, 'I told you so,' for approximately 6 months. Dalton laughed. A real laugh, the kind that surprised him. "Yes," he said, "he would have." He moved on to speak with Josiah, and Eleanor stood for a moment in the emptying room, with the summer heat pressing through the windows and the sound of Philadelphia going on outside, entirely indifferent to what had just happened in here. And she thought about Thomas, about the straight-lined letters of a man being precise, about Sense and Sensibility on a library shelf, about, "I knew you'd come. I know, Thomas," she thought. "I know you did." Caleb found her at the window. He stood beside her without speaking. He was good at that, the particular companionship of silence, not filling it, not rushing past it. She had noticed this about him in parts and pieces over the past 2 weeks, and had not quite let herself name it until now. "It'll take time," she said. "The legal process. Charges, trials, appeals. This could run for years. I know. Blackwood has money, and lawyers, and friends in places we don't know about yet. I know that too. It won't be clean. She turned to look at him. I want you to know that. It's not going to be the kind of ending where everything resolves and everyone goes home satisfied. Thomas is still dead. Greer is still dead. That doesn't change. No, he said, it doesn't. So why does it feel... She stopped, looked for the word. Like something, he said. Like the right kind of something, she said. Even with all of that. He was quiet for a moment. Then, my brother's name was Daniel. He was 34 when he died. He liked horses better than people, which I always thought was sound judgment. He used to say that the only thing worth doing was the thing you could look at afterward and not be ashamed of. A pause. I haven't been ashamed today. Eleanor looked at him. Something had been building for 2 weeks. Not the sudden kind of thing, not lightning, but the slow kind. The kind that doesn't announce itself, and then one day is simply there, and has clearly been there for a while. She recognized it the same way she recognized it in Thomas's letters, in Greer's careful documentation, in Foster's shaking voice. The thing a person does when they have decided, finally, that the truth matters more than safety. Caleb, she said, I want to ask you something. Ask. The marriage, the legal arrangement, she said it carefully. I know what it was. I know why we did it and what it was designed to accomplish. She held his gaze. I don't want it to only be that. He looked at her for a long moment. It hasn't only been that, he said. Not for a while. No, she agreed. Not for a while. Outside in the corridor, Josiah's voice carried, and Margaret laughed at something Dalton said, and Philadelphia went on existing beyond the windows, and Eleanor Whitmore stood in the hearing room where her brother's truth had finally been told, and looked at the man who had carried half of it for 3 years. I'm not easy to know, she said. I want you to have no illusions about that. I don't have illusions about anything, he said. It's one of my better qualities. You're stubborn. So are you. I run a railroad. I know. I've seen you do it. It's... He stopped. Something moved in his face that she hadn't seen before. Unguarded. It's something, Eleanor. Watching you work, it's genuinely something. She felt warmth move through her chest, different from the cold feeling of victory, softer and more frightening. Then stay, she said. Not as a legal convenience, not as a strategy. She stood straight, the way she always stood, the way she'd trained herself to stand since she was 14 years old, and first understood that the world would not hold her up if she didn't hold herself. As my husband, in the actual sense of it, if you want to. Caleb looked at her. Then he did something she hadn't expected. He reached out and took her hand. Not dramatically, not the grand gesture of a man performing romance, just his hand around hers, straightforward and real. I already am, he said, in the actual sense of it. Have been since the library, if I'm being exact about it. You should have said something. You had a federal case to build. I can manage more than one thing at a time. I know, he said. I've noticed. They walked out of the hearing room together, her hand still in his, into the corridor, where Margaret immediately looked at their joined hands and pressed her fingers to her mouth, and made a sound that was half laugh and half cry, which Eleanor ignored with dignity. The morning papers ran the story on the front page. Every paper. Not just the Gazette. All of them. Federal inquiry yields confession in Whitmore rail fraud. Blackwood implicated in engineer's death. The Register, which had run the article questioning Eleanor's mental state, ran a correction on page 2 that was so carefully worded it was almost an apology.
Almost. Richard Blackwood was arrested formally 4 days after the inquiry, charged with criminal fraud and conspiracy. The charges related to Thomas's death were still being built, Dalton told her. It would take longer. It would require more. But it was coming. James Aldrich, faced with the evidence and his own board members cooperating with the federal inquiry, chose to negotiate. His cooperation came with conditions that Josiah said amounted to Aldrich trying to buy his own reputation back at a price he clearly thought was reasonable, and Eleanor thought was not enough. The negotiations would go on for months. Hearst resigned from every board and committee he sat on within a week of the inquiry. He put out a statement referencing poor health. Nobody believed it, and nobody said so. 6 weeks after the hearing, on a morning in late August that was the first cool morning of the season, Eleanor sat at the head of the Whitmore railboard table for the second time, the first time officially, the first time without anyone in the room who had any intention of challenging her right to be there. She ran the meeting in 90 minutes. 3 new route proposals, 1 equipment contract, 2 staffing matters. When it ended and the other board members had gone, Caleb stayed. He was on the board now, too. She'd made him a formal member the week before, in his capacity as co-owner, which Josiah had said was legally sound, and Margaret had said was about time. "You didn't ask their opinion once," he said. "I have their vote. I don't need their opinion." "You're terrifying," he said. "You knew that." "I did." He stood, gathered his papers. The Pennsylvania route proposal, the northern extension. You were quiet when Aldrich presented it. "I'm not quiet about it. I'm thinking about it." She looked up at him. "Thomas wanted that route. He drew up the original survey himself." She paused. "I want to build it, and I want to name it after him." Caleb was still for a moment. "The Whitmore Northern," he said. "The Thomas Whitmore Northern Line." She closed her folder. "It'll take 3 years minimum, maybe 5. The capital isn't there yet, and the terrain between here and the New York state border is going to give every engineer we have a headache." She stood. "But it will be built." He looked at her with that expression she'd learned to read by now. The one that meant he'd found something he hadn't expected to find, and was still adjusting to the fact of it. "I don't doubt it for a moment," he said. She picked up her coat and moved toward the door, then stopped. "Caleb?" "Yes?" "When Whitfield came to the house, when he offered you Virginia and clean debts and a quiet life?" She turned to face him. "I've been thinking about that." "What about it?" "I never asked you what you gave up to stay here and do this." She held his gaze. "I know what it cost you. The name, Virginia, whatever version of your life you might have had." She paused. "I want you to know I don't take it lightly." He looked at her for a long moment. "The version of my life I might have had," he said slowly, "wasn't a version I wanted to go back to. Virginia, clean debts. Those things sound like relief until you think about what you'd be doing in that quiet life." He crossed the room and stopped in front of her. "I'd be living with what happened to Daniel. I'd be living knowing Blackwood was still walking free and Thomas Whitmore was buried under a story that wasn't true." His voice was even and entirely certain. "I didn't stay because I had nowhere else to go. I stayed because this was right. Because you were right. Because some things matter more than comfortable." Eleanor looked at him. "You are," she said, "a remarkably decent man. For someone with such a terrible reputation. You've done wonders for it," he said. "The papers are calling me the railroad husband." "Is that a complaint?" "Not even slightly," she laughed, genuinely. The kind that had been rare for 5 weeks after Thomas, and was less rare now. Coming back in increments, the way warmth comes back after a long winter, not all at once, but steadily, in the particular direction of forward. She took his hand. They walked out of the Whitmore Rail Building together, into the last good days of the Philadelphia summer, into a city that was still talking about the inquiry, into a life that was still being built from the pieces of the one that had broken. Thomas had known she would come. He had hidden the evidence in Jane Austen and trusted his careful, stubborn, brilliant sister to find it. He had written letters to a stranger in Virginia and trusted that stranger to hold the truth safe until she was ready to use it. He had built the case as far as he could and left the rest for her. She had finished it. She had found the evidence and the witnesses and the courage to stand in front of Richard Blackwood in a dark warehouse and not flinch. And she had built something else, too. Something she hadn't gone looking for. Something that had come out of shared work and shared grief, and two people who had both lost brothers and decided that loss was not the last word. The woman Philadelphia had called unmarriageable, too clever, too much. She had not been too much. She had been exactly enough. And the ruined man from Virginia, who had kept 3 years of evidence in a leather satchel and waited for the right moment and chosen truth over comfort at every turn, he had not been ruined at all. He had been exactly what this required. Together, they had done what Thomas Whitmore had started, and what powerful men had tried to bury, and the record would show it, and the truth was out, and it would not be taken back. Eleanor Hawthorne walked into the August sun with her husband beside her and her brother's company in her hands, and the life she had chosen, not given, not permitted, but chosen, every hard step of it, stretching out in front of her, and she did not look back.